She felt the hard clamp of a soldier's hand, dragging her into a dim room that stank of sweat and fear. The boards underfoot were cold and unyielding, marked by more than sorrow. In that instant, Nari's mind slid back to how it had truly begun. Life in her village was harsh. Most nights ended with empty stomachs and no answers. Then men from the district office appeared with polished smiles and official papers, promising overseas jobs that could keep whole families alive. They spoke of positions for young women, nursing aides, factory workers, respectable work, steady pay, a safe path out of hunger. For Nari, it sounded like a rescue rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. Everyone around her believed it too. The officials spoke with authority that felt impossible to question. Her parents trusted them because they had to. The other choice was watching their children starve. Refusal, they hinted, was unpatriotic. This was what good families did for their country. So, like nearly 200,000 other girls, Nari left home with a small bundle and a heart full of hope, not knowing the truth. By the time she saw the snare, it had already closed. Being a comfort woman was nothing noble. It was a nightmare assembled from lies. The comfort station she entered was a large Japanese house with 2 stories and 20 rooms. Many women were already there, faces older than their years, some wearing kimonos. The proprietor's wife ran the place with a cold, clipped manner. She handed the newcomers plain, scratchy dresses that had belonged to the older women. They were told to call those women Nesang, big sister, and to do exactly as they said. At 7 each morning, the big sisters rang a bell and the day began. Sleep was brief at best. The walls and floors were bare wooden planks. On arrival, each woman was issued a military blanket, thin and rough, no match for the hardness beneath. Nari braced herself and stepped out of her room, pain running through her body. How many would it be today? 30, perhaps 40? She drew a breath and joined the line. At first, the stations brought in prostitutes, but there were not enough of them to meet the army's appetite. So the recruiters widened their search. They targeted small villages and families most vulnerable to persuasion. Lack of schooling and grinding poverty made the girls easy prey for men who knew exactly which promises to make. Breakfast ran from 7 to 8. A thin bowl of gruel, sometimes rice, sometimes millet, was set before each woman. It never satisfied. They were hungry all the time, and most mornings began with silent tears sliding down their cheeks as they ate. Today, near 8 o'clock, as they finished their bowls, the proprietor walked in. His face twisted. He covered his nose in disgust. The smell clung to the room every day, but now it seemed to enrage him. He barked at them to wash. The water was always freezing. They hated bathing for that reason. One woman, her eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights, shook her head. The room went quiet. They all knew what would follow. The proprietor's face went red. He snatched a wooden stick from the corner and charged. Blow after blow landed. They heard each thud, each cry, until there were no more. She collapsed to the floor and went still. The others did not move. Fear nailed them in place. The sourness in the air seemed stronger now, edged with a faint hint of blood. The proprietor tossed the stick aside and stormed out. Some women shrank into the corners and tried to finish eating through tears. Most stared at the motionless body. The dirt under Nari's feet felt cold and gritty as she edged closer. She knelt, hands trembling, and touched the woman's shoulder. She could not tell if the woman was breathing. One of the big sisters rushed in and ordered them to carry her to a room, out of sight, away from attention. From 8 to 9, they took turns washing clothes in cold water. Fingers numbed as they scrubbed. Some stains never came out. Nari washed the unconscious woman's clothing, folding it afterward in the hope she would need it when she woke. At 8:45, the big sisters shouted for everyone to return to their rooms. They obeyed. They always did. Refusing brought punishment, beatings or worse, and the punishment was swift. They lived with constant fear of being hurt. Unlike some, Nari had not been beaten by soldiers, but the owner had struck her often. A few women had tried to escape. They were always found. Afterward came more beatings. Some did not survive. Nari could not even imagine running. She did not know where she was, which road to take, who might help. Where could she possibly go? So at 9 o'clock sharp, Sumi stood beneath her photograph on the veranda, inhaling the damp wood and the faint salt in the air. The long veranda served as a reception space. She steadied her face, fixed her posture, and waited for the day to begin again. The officers spoke as if the future were guaranteed. Sign the form, step onto the truck, and hardship would soften. The bargain sounded simple, her labour for her family's survival. Sleep, when it came, was shallow. The blanket caught more dust than warmth, and the planks pressed into bone. They learned quickly that questions brought trouble, and that the safest answers were yes or silence. The gruel coated their tongues without filling them. Tears came without sound. When the first blow landed, some flinched, as if hit themselves. They rinsed until their fingers ached. Soak, rub, wring, repeat, keeping their minds for the next hour. Everyone understood the rules without speaking them. Punishment came quickest for hesitation. Those who ran were dragged back, and the message was left on bruised skin for all to read. She stood beneath her photograph, steadying her breath against the damp, salt-tinged air, and waited. It was a large open space with wooden floors that creaked beneath every step. Along the veranda, the women's photographs were clipped to strings that dangled toward the street below. Those pictures had been taken on the very first day they arrived at this place of misery. One by one, they were lined up in front of a plain white sheet pinned to the wall, while the proprietor snapped the shot with an old boxy camera, its flash bursting sharply. Outside, soldiers formed a line that never seemed to end. Each held a voucher required for entry, and the queue stretched far down the road. Every time, Nari wished none of them would choose her, but someone always did. On this day, however, Nari attempted something different. At exactly 9:05 a.m, she made her move. The compound was heavily guarded, escape nearly impossible, but hiding could sometimes spare her from one or two encounters. As her big sister stepped away from the veranda, Nari slipped over the side rail, quietly finding an old tree close by. She climbed quickly, heart pounding, the bark scratching her hands and feet. She pulled herself into the branches, where the leaves grew thick, and pressed her body close to the trunk. From there she could see the ground, but the guards below couldn't easily spot her. Each time one walked by, she held her breath, willing herself invisible. But at 9:40, her hope collapsed. A guard happened to glance upward and caught sight of her in the tree. Her heart sank as he dragged her down and hauled her back. By 10:30, the proprietor had finished beating her. In desperation, at 10:35, she took a dull blade and cut away every strand of her hair, shearing it down to the skin. She thought if she looked unattractive, the soldiers might avoid her. By 11 o'clock, Nari's head was completely bare, patchy, raw, an image of despair. But the result was the opposite of what she had hoped. Instead of being overlooked, her shaved head became a spectacle. The story spread quickly, and soldiers now lined up just to see the woman who cut off her hair. The rooms where the abuse took place were small, barely enough space for two bodies to lie side by side. Instead of a door, a blanket hung across the entrance. The floors and walls were bare wood. Comfort stations opened each day at 9 a.m. and remained active into the night. From morning until 6 in the evening, enlisted soldiers filed through. From 6 to 7 p.m, the women were ordered to undergo examinations by a Japanese doctor. His task was supposedly to check them for disease, but he too took advantage. One by one, the women were made to undress, and he chose among them. Today, it was Sumi. The sharp smell of medicine clung to him as he forced himself on her, and she nearly gagged from the scent alone. During these examinations, doors and windows stayed open. Soldiers outside leaned in through the frames, watching, pointing, sometimes laughing. For many of the women, this hour felt worse than the soldiers' visits. The humiliation of being displayed as entertainment crushed what little dignity remained. About a month earlier, Nari had contracted a serious illness from the soldiers. The proprietor's wife injected her with a treatment called number 606, or salvarsan, one of the earliest drugs used against syphilis. The solution was thick, reddish, and painful, but the disease persisted. Since Nari was still forced to endure the men, even while sick, Again and again, the injections followed, leaving her arm bruised and throbbing. There were no proper clinics nearby. Medical care was crude and careless. If any woman became pregnant, she was never allowed to carry the baby. Sumi was one of those women. She never knew which man had fathered the child. The place where they were treated was a dim room that reeked of chemicals and neglect. Thin walls let the cries and moans travel out into the corridor, a constant reminder of suffering. From 7 o'clock to 9 p.m., the station was reserved for non-commissioned officers. Their turn was separate, a different kind of cruelty. But today, at exactly 2:02 p.m., the routine was broken. Planes thundered overhead, the sky roaring with engines as bombs struck nearby. Air raids were frequent, sometimes multiple times in a single day. Sirens wailed. Guards shouted at the women to move, forcing them into the thickets as explosions shook the ground. They stumbled through underbrush, branches clawing at their arms and faces, clothes torn. Nari's heartbeat thundered in her ears, nearly drowning out the blasts. During the desperate flight, hunger clawed at her. At 2:15, she spotted a field of sugarcane. Too weak to think, she tore at the stalks, sucking out the sweet juice for a moment of relief. But the moment ended violently. A guard caught her, yanking her to the ground. The beating that followed was savage, her second of the day. She trembled, not just from pain but from terror. Another woman helped her back up as they were herded toward the caves. Nari could barely walk, her legs refusing to carry her. The woman spoke in Korean, urging her to move. The words gave Nari a flicker of strength, but speaking Korean was forbidden. A guard noticed the whispering. Whether or not he heard the words didn't matter. He lashed out, striking the woman hard across the head. The roar of bombs filled the air, but his blow was clear enough. That single act was punishment enough for daring to speak her native tongue. The punishment came instantly, harsh and merciless. 2 other women rushed forward, lifting both of them, trying to carry them away to safety. By 2:30, they stumbled upon a cave. Its entrance gaped wide and menacing, the inside damp and smelling of wet earth. Everyone, soldiers and women alike, crouched together inside, barely breathing. They listened in silence as the thunder of bombs rolled farther away. At 3 p.m., when the terrifying explosions had faded into the distance, no one dared to move. The air remained thick with dust, stirred up by the blasts, coating their throats and lungs. They all huddled closer, eyes flicking nervously toward the guards, waiting for any signal. By 3:15, it became clear the air raid had ended. The men wasted no time. They began hammering stakes into the soggy ground, their thuds steady and mechanical. Canvas sheets flapped angrily in the wind as they raised makeshift tents, temporary shelters, as fragile as the women themselves. Meanwhile, the proprietor and his wife set up shop. From a wooden box, they pulled out stacks of vouchers, sorting them with quick, practiced hands. The wife barked at the soldiers, her sharp voice cutting through the tense silence as she ordered them into line. Weary and filthy from battle, the soldiers shuffled forward, handing over vouchers eagerly, ready to claim their so-called comfort. The women stayed close together, trying to vanish into the shadows. None dared to raise their eyes, their heads bowed, their bodies taut with dread. The proprietor marched toward them and grabbed one woman by the chin, yanking her face upward. He twisted it cruelly under the dim, flickering light, displaying her like livestock at market. Her lips were cracked, swollen, and caked with dried blood, a silent testament to her suffering. She winced, fresh pain flashing across her bruised face, but his grip only tightened. Then suddenly, one soldier stopped in front of Nari. She was barely conscious, still weak from the beating earlier. Without hesitation, he pointed at her, as though choosing food from a stall. At 4 o'clock, the shrill voice of the proprietor's wife jolted Nari awake. She demanded that Nari crawl to a nearby tent, but Nari was too frail to rise. She dragged herself slowly across the ground, her limbs trembling. Impatient, the wife began kicking her legs and ribs, until one of Nari's elder sisters pulled her into the tent. Since no doctor would be coming that day, the hours from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. were reserved for enlisted soldiers. The tent swayed violently in the wind, collapsing now and then, but the men ignored it. They went on with their visits, oblivious to the chaos or the silent tears of the women. Most were young, barely 19 or 20, the same age as those they tormented. A non-commissioned officer entered Nari's tent. He said something to her. She thought it was her name. Though she barely knew Japanese, after a year of this life, she understood bits and pieces. Still trembling, she shook her head, silent. Her refusal seemed to excite him more. He loomed over her, inspecting her like an object. Time was up. The soldier left, smirking. Nari curled her arms around herself, seeking a comfort that never came. Men entered one after another. She lost count of how many. Because of the day's air raids, the proprietor and his wife pushed harder to maintain profits. The women never saw a single coin. Just after 10 p.m., the tent flap opened again. The final soldier of the night entered. His uniform was clean but bore faint traces of soap and gunpowder. His boots squished softly in the mud beside her blanket. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as he asked if she remembered him. Nari blinked, trying to recall his face, but it blurred into the countless others. She shook her head faintly. He sighed, a sad smile tugging at his lips as he sat beside her. He explained he had been with her twice before. Without meeting her eyes, he removed his uniform and confessed he was a kamikaze pilot. Later that night, he would fly his final mission, never to return. Before that, he wanted to be with Sumi one last time. She froze, the weight of his words pressing down. Then, softly, he began to hum a quiet tune, careful not to be overheard. Through his song, Sumi discovered where they were, Hsinchu, Taiwan. All this time, she hadn't known. Before leaving, the soldier stood, his figure outlined in the doorway. He reached into his pocket and gently pulled something out. He handed a small photograph of himself, its edges worn and frayed. Along with it, he gave her his toiletries, things he said he would no longer need. They carried his scent, a sharp mix of mint and sweat. As he stepped away, Sumi gripped the little photograph tightly. It was the first flicker of kindness she had felt from a man since being forced into this life. She lowered herself back onto the cot, the coarse fabric of the military blanket scratching against her skin. By 10:35 p.m., the proprietor and his wife had gathered the women and began driving them toward the comfort station. The path wound through the jungle. It was dark, oppressive, and full of menace. The big sisters barked orders and shoved the women forward. The forest seemed alive, its shadows pressing in on them, watching. They clung to one another, those still stronger helping the weaker just to keep them on their feet. By midnight, they reached the comfort house again. The structure loomed cold and hostile. It was meant to be home, yet felt more like a prison. Each woman returned to her assigned room. Hunger gnawed at their empty stomachs. Most were battered, bruised, and too broken to do anything but try to numb the pain. They lay down beneath the thin, scratchy military blankets, but the fabric offered little warmth. As Nari shifted on the hard floor, searching for some position of comfort, she could hear the muffled sobs of the women around her. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and filled with nightmares. Those who survived the night woke only to face another day meant to strip them of their dignity. When the Second World War ended, nearly 200,000 comfort women were technically freed. Yet true liberation never came. Many carried lifelong injuries, untreated illnesses, and scars too deep to heal. Shunned by their families and stigmatized by society, they were forced to bear their suffering in silence. For those who dared to speak, the struggle for justice became endless, met with political denial, cold bureaucracy, and rare apologies that arrived far too late. The world's recognition moved at a glacial pace, forcing survivors to relive their torment in courtrooms and in front of indifferent governments. Even in resilience, many spent their final years haunted by the weight of betrayal and neglect. Their story is not only a record of tragedy, it is a monument to survival, the cruelty of silence, and the unbroken demand for justice. If you want to give your sympathy to those women, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more informative videos like this. Tell me in the comments from which part of the world you tuned in. Thank you for watching.